Welcome to Mr. Smith's Indoor Garden Videogram. You know, there's such a wide range of plants to choose from for the indoor gardener, and so many aspects in the house. The house offers as many aspects as the garden outside. But there are plants that test the skill of the expert. And yet there are plants like the ivy that encourage the raw beginner because they'll grow virtually anywhere. But half the fun of indoor gardening is finding out where the plant will grow best. And once you've got it right, there's no doubt about it that plants brighten up the home. And they give you a fascinating hobby as well. Coleus must be one of the most popular of all foliage plants, and I think deservedly so. But to keep the brightly coloured leaves in healthy condition, they need good but diffused light. Too much sun, too much shade can cause the leaves to fade. And they need a temperature of around 60 degrees Fahrenheit and quite a lot of water in the summertime. Now, you can grow them from seed, but when you've got a particularly attractive leaf colour, then the best way to make certain you're going to reproduce that is to take cuttings. Cut your parent plant back like that. What you're trying to do is make it produce young, strong, non-flowering growth, short-jointed, like this one here, not a great distance between the leaf joints, and not too sappy. Just the sort of young shoot that will root quickly without wilting. And I'm going to take it off low down, back close to the stem, and then trim the lower leaves off. You don't want anything that's going to rot underneath the rooting compost. And then mix up your compost for rooting. And the material I use always for Coleus is a mixture of sand and a loamy soil. I don't find they do quite so well in the peat-based compost. Loam seems to make them work harder because you've got to make Coleus work hard all the time. If you get them too soft, too sappy, then you lose the intensification of leaf colour, which is the whole beauty of the plant. And even though Coleus do root very easily, I dip them in rooting powder. Take every opportunity of making certain that the conditions you provide are perfect for rooting. Right down, push it right down to the bottom of the hole so that lower leaf joint there is just buried, really on the surface rather than buried, because I'm coppering both my bets there. And a tap to settle everything into intimate contact. If there's any airspace around the base of the cutting, then it's not going to root. And then put it in a place where it'll be warm, where it'll be moist, because you don't want the leaves losing moisture until the roots form. If you're in doubt about the air being dry, then put a polythene bag over the top, but make certain that the leaves aren't touching the side of it, because that beauty of foliage is easily destroyed, and they'll start to rot off. And then in 3 or 4 weeks' time, the plant should be well enough rooted to have a quick look. And actually, it's obvious that this one has, because the leaves are upright, they're thick, they're healthy. And at this stage, I like to stop it, to take the growing tip out. If you've got long fingernails, that's fine. Only that much. Don't go and butcher it, because what you're doing, you're trying to make the young growths break from each of the leaf joints. It can't grow from anywhere else on the stem except a leaf joint. And what you want is a stocky, well-foliaged plant with a mass of these brightly coloured leaves. If you don't nip the top out, it goes on growing like a palm tree, and you get a single stem and nothing else. But just to make certain. There, you see, the roots are beginning to explore the compost, but they're not far enough into it. I like to make Coleus work all the time. Put them in a rich compost. You get soft, fleshy growth. You don't get the brightly coloured leaves. So I want that root ball to be very, very much more pot-bound than it is then. And even then I won't feed it. I'll keep it working for a living. You've got to be cruel to be kind. Then if your chemistry's right, this is what you end up with. Now, with any other plant but a coleus, I would say that was getting pot-bound. But with a coleus, I don't want it in a rich compost. I don't want it in a big pot. So I'm going to give it another week or two to fill the rest of the space there with roots. And then I'll move it into a pot only one size bigger. No more. I don't want to spoil it. And that is what they should look like. Short, stocky plant, well furnished with leaves and with foliage that looks like gold-edged red velvet, that adds dignity to any room. Ferns are one of the most compellingly interesting plants that I've ever grown. But one thing that they do all the time, and that is express a coolness and an elegance that no other plant can match. They are a true foliage plant. You don't get any flowers, but they have such a quality of foliage interest that you don't mind that there's no flowers there. Just look at that. You've got a contrasting stem, a blue-black stem, and the very pale green of the frond coming from it, the maidenhair fern. But the one thing that they do demand is cool, shady, humid conditions. They don't like hot air, they don't like a dry air, and the one thing that I discovered to my regret was the fact that you can't clean the foliage with one of the chemical leaf cleaners. Don't ever touch them with a chemical. All they want is a spray over with water when it's warm weather. And give them a position in a north-facing room if possible, where the light is good but very diffused, and where you can keep the temperature fairly low, around about 55 is ideal. And once you've got one plant, it's very easy to turn it into 2 or 3, because they all have the happy knack of being easily divided. Take the ladder fern. They're an entirely different texture of foliage. Look at those two together. You don't need anything else. You don't need flowers because you've got the foliage contrast, the different colors. Knock them out of the pot. And that's the sort of root system they form. A great mass of brown tentacles growing round, but always with some of the fatter storage roots there in the compost. And when I'm splitting these up, I take some of the fatter roots with each of the young plantlets. Do it when growth is starting. Tip it up that way, away from you. Find out where the plant has divided naturally. If you can see there, there's obviously the makings of 2 different plants there. You get your fingers in, they're very tough, which is a bonus. Anything that's tough is going to be able to put up with being riven apart like that. There, it's falling into natural divisions without a great deal of discomfort to the plant. And they don't need a special compost. What I do is use a John Innes, and I mix in an extra part of sand and an extra part of peat. And it's about the size of pot. Don't stint them. See, there's a young plant that expresses all the elegance, all the arching pattern. It is a pretty thing, the ladder fern, really it is. Lovely. Little tap in there like that. If I used any smaller pot, I would be constricting those roots too much, and it'd be a waste of time repotting. Firm it down. And firm it fairly hard, because I'm going to stand them in a tray for at least 10 days after I've repotted. That's a tray, rather, a saucer with water in it. And then, because I'm going to take it into the house, this one's going into the room, I'm just going to clip those off. There. That really is elegant. And I noticed when I was pulling it apart that the fronds themselves were sporing. There you can see the little, what you would almost call the seed of the fern. It's an embryo seed, put it that way. But they're not quite ripe. They're not quite ready for taking. But I've got some dried off. I took them off and hung them up in a paper bag. And take those out. And there's a great massive spores in the bottom of the bag there. And those I'm going to sow on top of a mixture of peat and sand, something that is free draining and yet will hold the moisture. And because they're very fine and dust-like, just get the paper, start at one side of the pot, and very gently tap it. And by doing it like that over the top of the compost, you make certain that the spores are evenly spread. You don't get them all down in one place. And then what I want there is close, humid, warm, moist conditions, exactly what the young ferns need to get away properly. So what we did without polythene, I'll never know, because it's the perfect cover for a pot like that. I've encased it. Now I've given it a little world all of its own. And I didn't water it on purpose because I work on the principle that you put it where it can get as much as it wants and no more. And if I'd watered that from above, I'd have washed every one of those little spores around the edge of the pot. And they'd been awfully crowded in there. So get a saucer of water, fairly deep saucer, and pop it in like that. And that will take up moisture. I'll keep filling that up until there's a film of moisture right over the top of the compost. I didn't do it by plunging because, again, you get a rush of water coming up, you get a film of moisture on the surface, and these spores are so very, very light that they float, they bob about all over the top and all suck to the edge. That way it'll take what it wants, no more. And keep watching, because in about 3 weeks, in close, humid conditions like that, you'll get a film of green over the top of the compost. Don't do anything then. Leave it there until you see the little fronds coming up. And then you can dig them out and you can pot them up in very small pots. Use very tiny pots, what we call thumb pots, about that big. And use the same compost that you potted the parent up into, with a lot of peat and a lot of sand. And they are elegant. They are the most attractive plants. Think of a fireplace in summer, dead, no fire there, just a gaping hole. And take a fern and stand it in front of it and see the way the fronds take off the bareness, the darkness of the stone, and bring the room to light. They are very, very beautiful pot plants. Poinsettias express better than any other plant the real pleasure of indoor gardening. To get brilliant coloured bracts like that in the middle of winter, well, what more could a gardener ask? And you can get them not only in vivid scarlet, you can get them in pink, you can get them in creamy yellow as well, so you can have a whole patina of colour using poinsettias alone. And it's no use buying a plant of that quality and taking it straight out into the freezing cold winter weather. That's the surest way to kill it. Make sure before you take it out it's properly wrapped, that you get it home as quick as you can, and then give it a position in good light, but not direct sunlight. And I find a temperature when you've got it into the house of around 60, 65 is ideal. They don't want very high temperatures. And be careful with the watering. Don't overwater, don't underwater. Wait until the compost is just dry on top, and then soak them from underneath so they're thoroughly wet. And feeding, well, there's really enough feed in the compost to keep the plant going. So don't overfeed it. Leave it alone. And they really are a joy to the eye. And after 3 or 4 months in the house, most poinsettias, mine included, look something like this. They're a wee bit tired of it. They're getting old, they're getting past it. And you dry them off, thoroughly dry them off. What I'm trying to do is make this plant rest. I've had the beauty of it for a long, long time. I want to rest it. And the only way you can make them rest is to dry them off. That soil is as dry and arid as the Sahara Desert. And when it's comfortably dried off, and when the leaves are beginning to yellow and turn brown, and it's obvious that all growth has stopped, cut it back. Don't throw it away. You've had the beauty of it, and by taking care of it now, you can probably repeat that beauty next year. What I'm going to do is to cut it back, to force the young shoots into growth by watering the soil, by, if necessary, feeding it. Don't be frightened to do the job properly, because I want some shoots, but I don't want too many shoots. In other words, I'm cutting to leave 1, 2, possibly 3 buds to break there. Same with that one. A rough average, about what, 4 or 5 inches. And there, this is the important thing with poinsettias. The milky latex there, oozing out of the cuts at the top. You've got to seal those off, like that, with charcoal, or with a little bit of cigarette ash if you're a smoker. Anything that'll mildly cauterize the wounds you've left and stop it oozing and continuing to ooze this latex. Now, at that stage, all I've got to do now is to start and water it, and if necessary, feed it. The whole aim of this process is to boost growth, to get young shoots that make perfect cuttings. And as simple as that. The plant's eager to grow. You've given it a holiday, and it wants to go. And when they get to this stage, they're ideal for making cuttings. Those young growths that you've forced up with the watering and the feeding are just at the right stage. Vitally important that you cut below node with euphorbias. Because even though you cut below node, that's what happens. You get bleeding from the wound, and you must seal that off very quickly. See, it's dripping from the base of the cutting there, and the same thing applies with that. A little bit of sealant, charcoal, and a touch of rooting powder to stimulate rooting. What you want to do is get roots on them as quick as possible so the roots can replace the moisture the leaves are losing. And I mix my own compost for rooting into. It's a mixture of 1 part peat, 1 part sand, and get them into that as quick as possible. Hold with your finger. Push the cutting right down to the base of the hole. You don't want any airspace at the bottom at all. Right on the edge of the pot, clay pot. And then there's room for 1, 2 more cuttings there. Take the next one. Take your time, look for the right place to cut. Don't go in like a butcher and cut the first shoot that you come to. Underneath the node, clean, sharp cut. Seal it very, very quickly, because the great upsurge of sap that is produced by spring growth never fails to astound me. The energy that must go into that. And then seal your cutting. There's 2 leaves there that'll have to come off as well, and that means 2 more cuts. Nip them like that. You've actually stimulated the plant by wounding it even more. So put the rooting powder on the wound at the base and on the 2 wounds at the side into the compost. Tap to settle it down. Important always with cuttings that you push it right to the bottom of the hole, that you firm it in so that the rooting medium, the sand and peat, are in close and intimate contact with the base of the cutting. There's no airspace there to stop them rooting. Water it very, very quickly. And if you've got a propagating frame, put it into it, because there it's ideal, warm and humid. If you haven't, my mother has a trick. She makes a loop of wire, 2 of them, U-shaped, to make a framework over the top of the pot, and then cover it with polythene, and the wire loops hold the polythene away from the plant leaves, and you've got just the warm, humid conditions that encourage rooting. The quicker, the better, in 4 to 6 weeks with a bit of luck. But I'm not going to throw the old plant away, because if you look there, you can see the buds beginning to break up the stem. And by watering, and by feeding, and by cherishing that plant, you've got to take care of it. In due course, I'll have something that looks like that. And the euphorbia is interesting. It shares something in common with things like chrysanthemums. Those bracts, the coloured leaves that give the plant their interest, don't start to colour until you get the short days, until you get under 12 hours of daylight, and keep them warm, a temperature of about 65 degrees Fahrenheit, well watered, and then you'll get that flaming vermilion bract that's such a joy to look at Christmas time. You know, a rubber plant really is like a highly polished piece of furniture. If you don't dust it regularly, you lose a lot of its beauty. And it is the most popular of the foliage plants. It's the sort of plant that everyone gives as a present because it's easy to look after. This is a great thing with a plant that will go on growing for years and years, provided you look after it right. And what do you look for when you're buying it in a garden centre or a nursery? Well, you want a short jointed plant. You don't want something that's been pulled right out of recognition. You want the shortest possible distance between the nodes. You don't want a plant where the bottom leaves are going yellow. This is a common failing with a lot of rubber plants. It means they haven't been treated properly. And you want something that's big enough to see when you put it on the dining room table or in a corner of the room. And having bought it and paid your money for it, make sure it's wrapped before you take it home, because particularly in winter, if you're walking through the streets and it's freezing cold and you take a plant out of a greenhouse, it can be damaged so severely by the time you get it home that it's not worth having anyway. And having got it home, where do you put it? Well, of course, the place that you'd like to see it in best, but do make certain that it's not in full sun. They've got big evergreen leaves. This is typical of a plant that grows in jungle conditions. Fairly shady, very, very humid. They've got an enormous leaf expanse to lose moisture from. Water it regularly, particularly in summer. Make sure that the compost is kept evenly moist, but in winter, remember it isn't growing. So don't water it quite as much. I tend to let the compost get as dry as that. It's almost bone dry on top, but moist underneath. And that's a good indication to make certain that you're not getting it over wet in winter. In summer, well, it is very difficult to overwater in summer. The thing is, you can see the extension growth that's going on there. That's the growth that's taking place now. It needs a lot of moisture to push that along. But this is a fine, healthy plant. There's no sign of yellow leaves at the base, but obvious signs that it needs repotting. The roots are right through onto the top there. Easy enough to repot. Don't use a pot very much bigger than the one it's in. Try it first. Just about a fit. I can just get my fingers down between the edge of the pot that I'm putting it into and the one that it's in already. So that'll do fine. And whenever I'm riddling peat, I keep a little bit of the tailings, a little bit of the coarse stuff that won't go through the riddle to use for bottoming off pots. Because especially when you're working indoors, you don't want the compost that you're going to use going straight through the drainage holes. And a little bit of coarse peat holds the moisture and stops the compost going through, like that. And use a peat-based compost. Increasingly, I'm finding that a lot of the loam-based compost, the standard varies so much that I'm never sure what it's going to do to my plants. The peat-based seem to be fairly standard, particularly for things like a rubber plant. Fingers over the top of the pot like that. Don't ever knock it out holding, because the thing will shoot out and bounce on its top, which doesn't do any plant any good. There you've got it secure. Stem between the fingers, smart tap on the bottom, and you can see how the roots have been forced up. They've gone down as far as they can. They're matted on the bottom. They've been forced up out of the top of the pot, which was the only place there was any room. Check for level. That is just about right. You want enough space at the top for watering, and yet it wants to be firmly anchored, so it's just about the right level. Firm it down, not too much like that. You'll know very quickly whether you haven't got all the interstices between the side of the pot and the root ball of the plant filled the first time you water it, because all the holes that weren't filled before will be sucked down with the water and filled with compost, and you'll have a gap at the top. But that's easy enough to top off. The best way of settling any plant down, good tap like that. Now, I couldn't straighten that plant up because it was growing a wee bit off center. The way I'll straighten it up is to put that side to the dark part of the room, this side towards the light, and the plant will naturally grow towards the light and straighten up. All I've got to do now is water it and put it in a focal point in the room. Always with a strong personality plant, with a positive foliage plant like this, give them a focal point in the room, make them a center of attention. They'll do the rest for you. It's no use having a feature plant if the foliage, which is the plant's main attraction, gets dirty and clogged up with soot and dust. And all you need do is take a sponge and some tepid water and just very carefully clean the leaves off. There, look how the light catches that. When it's clean, it seems to pick up and change the tones of green. And in addition, of course, the leaf is a living, functioning factory. The sunlight falling on there is the source of the food supply for the whole plant. If that leaf is discolored with dirt, there's less light gets into it, and of course the whole factory tends to break down. And also the surface and the underneath part of the leaf is covered with a whole series of fine holes, and the plant breathes through those. And if they get clogged up with dirt, then it can't breathe properly, and the leaves turn yellow, they get discolored, and you don't want anything that mars the overall beauty of a feature plant. This is part of the art of gardening. You've got to work with it, you've got to look after it, you've got to tend its needs, and then you get the satisfaction of a really healthy looking plant. You can use manufactured cleaning fluids, but if you're using a fluid for the first time, then be very careful. Far better to try it on one of the lower leaves that's out of sight, one of the little ones, and then wait a week. And if there's no sign of discoloration, you can do the whole plant. And if you've got a plant with soft foliage, like a fern, or a plant with hairy leaves, then don't use any cleaner on it at all. The only thing you can really do with that is to dust it with a very light duster. This particular plant, as the leaves mature, you begin to get the indentations in the leaf that give the plant its popular name, the Swiss cheese plant. I'd rather like it when you get 3 or 4 different shapes of leaves, some deeply cut like that one, some only just beginning with only a couple of incisions, and some altogether plain. It adds to the overall interest of the plant. It gives you a different light reflection as well. And they do form what we call aerial roots, which grow out up the stem. And the thing to do with these is to tuck them back into the compost, so they're forming a function. Actually tuck them into the compost that the plant's growing in. Or, when they get longer, double pot it. That's to put the pot that the plant's growing in inside another container, making sure it hasn't got a hole in the bottom. And then in the base of it, you put either moist peat or wet sphagnum, and then you tuck the roots back into there, and they're helping the plant. They're absorbing the moisture. They're helping to cut down the moisture loss from the leaves. It's naturally trailing in habit, so you have to stake it. The best thing to do is to get a support that's strong enough to hold the plant up, that's unobtrusive and made even more unobtrusive by wrapping it round with moist sphagnum moss or osmundifiber, anything that'll hold moisture, and then you've created a reservoir there. It will take it up from the soil if you keep it moist. If you pour a little water down it, it keeps it moist, and then as that water evaporates, it puts a layer of moist air round the leaves, and that cuts down the moisture loss from the leaves almost immediately. The more humidity you can keep in the atmosphere, the better for the plant. Most important point of all, don't ever grow a big leaf plant like this in full sun. Nothing takes the gloss off the leaf quicker. It goes a silvery grey, and very, very quickly the leaves begin to go brown round the edges and droop and die. And when that happens, there's nothing really you can do about it except take it into the hospital, pop it in the bathroom. But by regular watering, by keeping it in a shady place, by tucking your roots back into the compost so they're performing a function, by staking it and keeping the stake and its moss covering moist, and by sponging the leaves, then it becomes an object of beauty, a real feature plant. Palms are amongst my favourite house plants. They have a grace and an elegance that few plants can equal, and they enjoy cool, shady conditions, which means you can use them in a north-facing room. And one that I'm particularly fond of is the Camedora elegans, and you can grow this particular palm from seed. There's only one problem. You've got to give it very, very, very hot conditions to germinate. Temperatures of around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And the only place you can have that, of course, if you haven't got a greenhouse, is in the airing cupboard. Put a handful of peat in a clear polythene bag and get the seeds. Those are big seeds, quite big seeds. There's an awful lot of food in there, but the seed coat is very, very hard. But pop them inside a polythene bag like that with the peat. Shake them up so they're well mixed. Wrap the top over. And I hang that in the airing cupboard so it's just above the cistern. The warmest place in the house. The temperature is tropical, not touching the cistern, otherwise it gets too hot. Gets all the warm air, the even temperature. Inside the bag it's like a little tropical greenhouse. You've got the moisture, the humidity and the warmth. But you must check them every day. Remember, they're in a dark airing cupboard. Immediately the seed begins to break, to chit. That is, the capsule begins to split. They've got to come out into the light. If you don't check them for a fortnight and they've germinated, you're going to have something that looks like a white rush in the airing cupboard, and they never make good plants after that. But if you've got a greenhouse, you can sow them in the normal way, using a peat-based compost. And with a big seed like this, you can space them out on top of the mixture, not too many to a pot. You shouldn't need to water that compost anymore. Don't get the compost soggy wet. That doesn't encourage germination. It really encourages rotting. It wants to be evenly moist. Now a sheet of glass over that and a newspaper and into the greenhouse where it's warm and temperate. Don't be impatient. If it's not up within 2 months, wait, because the compost is doing your work, the conditions are right, the seed will come up, and after a year, and I really mean a year, this is how long this took, they look something like this. Already the character of the plant is established, this quality of grace that, to my mind, is almost unequaled in houseplants, the leaf beginning to arch over to display the frond. It really is a treasure of a palm tree. But they want moving on then. And strangely enough, the Camedora is one plant that doesn't really mind being overpotted. With a lot of plants, if you put them into a big pot, then you get root stagnation and the thing damps off. But with the Camedora, it's the most obliging little thing. That. Oh boy. Don't want two in a pot though. And take the moss off. That's indicative of the conditions you've given it, the moisture and the humidity. And there, incredible, that shows how hard the seed is. There's the little seed that the plant grew from, the husk of the seed. So you can imagine how much warmth and humidity and moistening that's taken to break to let the little shoot grow out. I'll leave it on, not doing any harm. Good root system, all the qualities I look for in a young plant. Very gently. Down into the compost. That is something that is going to be in your house if you care for it properly. Remember, coolness, temperature about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, good light, don't forget to water it, not too much, just needs enough water to keep the compost moist. And there, even at that stage, that plant is elegant. And it'll go on becoming more and more elegant until it gets to this stage. This is Big Brother. The foliage is carried fairly closely to the stem at this stage, but the same graceful arch, the same quality that the plant carries right through its life until it gets to the near maturity. It really is an elegant, graceful plant. When you're walking around a garden centre, you know, there's no way that you can overlook the crotons, the Joseph's coat. They've got such spectacular leaf colours that they make an immediate impact on you. But what do you look for if you're buying a croton for the first time? You want a plant that's furnished right down to the base like that. No sign of bare stem. It's beautifully formed. It's been well grown under ideal conditions. And once you get it into the home, try it in various places until you find a position it likes. And that sort of position is in an even temperature. It wants nothing less, really, if you can provide it, than 65 degrees Fahrenheit, nice and even. And once you've discovered the position that it likes, leave it there. It hates being moved around. And it wants humidity, too. If you get a dry atmosphere, it tends to drop. But eventually, no matter how well you grow them, you're going to get the lower leaves beginning to fall, to leave a bare stem. This is a natural habit. It's not your bad gardening. It's a natural habit of the plant because it grows under conditions of intense competition. So it's thrusting up all the time. And to prevent that, if you look there, there's a growing point deep down in the tip of the plant there. Now, frequently, that will die of its own volition, and then the shoots will come from the base. But if you've got a plant that's persisting in growing up and up and up, all you've got to do is get a pair of tweezers and very gently nip it out. That's all it needs. That little terminal portion of the stem, a fractional little piece, enough to stop it growing, enough to make it branch out. But in the course of time, it does get to this stage. It begins to look like a standard rather than a houseplant. But I'm beginning to think in terms of taking cuttings. And by heading them back, by making it branch, I've produced the ideal cuttings, the ideal material for cutting taking. There's a shoot there, just beginning to harden at the base, still young and soft at the top. It's young enough to root very, very quickly, yet mature enough to survive long enough for the roots to be produced. This is the critical period. Taking cuttings, you've got to make sure that they're there, ready to be taken, ready to root, not too early, not too late. And that's just about right. That is a good cutting. Just beginning to firm at the base, and yet still soft at the top. Young enough to root quickly, which is the aim, because when anything is evergreen, immediately you take it from the plant, it doesn't stop losing moisture. It goes on pumping it out, and very quickly the leaves begin to droop and they die. And once that happens with a croton, your chances are very slim indeed. Take the lower leaves off. You can nip them off with your fingers, and I work on the principle that you're going to put almost half that stem into the compost. And wounding is good for cuttings. Within limits, the more you wound like that, the more you stimulate the plant by cutting it, the more root system you're going to get and the quicker you're going to get it. And the mixture I use is my old standby, the 2 parts of sand, 1 of peat. Abrasive and yet moisture holding. And dip that in rooting powder, and then take the finger and rub the rooting powder over the wounds up the stem. Every little scrap of root I get gives that plant a better chance of surviving. And the quicker it's off the plant and into the compost, the better. Make a hole in the compost with your fingers. Bury about half the cutting. Firm it well in, tap. And then water it, not over the leaves. Soak the compost, make sure the compost's wet, and that evaporates around the leaves. I don't like to get the leaves wet before the roots are there, but because those leaves are evergreen, and because they haven't stopped losing moisture because I've taken it from the plant, cut down transpiration loss by putting a rubber band loosely. Don't put it tight or you kink the veins of the leaf, and that bruises them and they discolor right round where you've nipped them. That's just about it. You've cut down the area of leaf where it loses moisture. You've married it in and put it into the frame or into anywhere where it's going to have a warm bottom, a cold top. This is vital with crotons, a warm bottom, cool top. And one thing I found, the plastic bag trick with croton cuttings doesn't work. If you put them inside a tightly closed plastic bag, they get soft rot and they damp off, and that's it. They need, after about a week, that little current of air to keep the air circulating, cut down the risk of fungus disease. Gradually lift it until after a period of about 3 weeks, you can take the top off. It's there, rooted, ready to go indoors, to be potted on. And when you get that sort of development of root out of the base of the pot, no need to knock it out to see whether it's rooted. It's rooted right enough. It's itching to be out into something bigger. It's grown up. It wants more than baby food. It wants something with a bit of meat into it. And I pot the cuttings up into a loam-based compost. There are some plants that like a richer diet than a peat-based compost can provide. Loam gives them that. It's the liver and kidney of the gardening world, something with a bit of body into it. They've started to go round and round the bottom of the pot and then out through the drainage hole. Let them get past that stage so the base of the root is matted. And they're very reluctant to root out into the new compost. It's very difficult to get them to start again, as they say. So use a loam mixture. Good earth, peat and sand. It has a smell that's entirely different to the peat-based mix. And not too big a pot. You don't want to over-pot, you don't want to under-pot. It's a question with the Joseph's coat of getting everything just right. If you're in doubt how much compost to put into the bottom of the pot, try it. That's just about right. Your compost wants to be just below the level it was in the smaller pot. Fill around the sides. This mixture is a wee bit dry, but I'm not worried about that because I'm going to soak it from the base anyway to make sure the whole of the mixture is evenly moist. And firm it with your fingers down the side. Tap the pot to level it off. And there. All I've got to do is drop that into a soak tank, let it get thoroughly moist, and it can go in with the rest of the houseplant collection. And already, the character of the plant is there. The brighter coloured leaves at the base, the top, a paler green, which will eventually colour. But the contrast is attractive, and it's not just the individual leaf colours that complete the plant. It's all the variations in leaf shape that you can get in the Joseph's coat that make it such a fascinating plant to collect. There are so many attractive stove plants, that is plants that need fairly moist, humid, high temperatures, that in most houses the only way you can be certain of getting them comfortable is to grow them in a terrarium. Now that can be anything from an old obsolete aquarium to a thing specially made for the job. And there you give them exactly the conditions they'd get at home, in the jungle. Moisture, humidity, a controlled temperature. But the main virtue of this form of gardening, as far as I'm concerned, is I can garden. I can get in and I can build little hillocks, and I can arrange plants so that each one complements or contrasts with the other. So I get the benefit of a whole border of foliage, if you like, in miniature. And I've already put a layer of gravel on the bottom to provide drainage, mixed up with a good handful or two of charcoal to keep it all sweet and nice. And then on top of that, I've used a peat-based compost, but to every 3 parts of the compost, I put a part of gravel to give it the sharp, gritty drainage. And I don't want fast growth. I don't want things burgeoning out of the top. That's not the idea. I want to put little plants in, and I want to watch them grow slowly into the picture that I had in my mind when I created it. Put the tall ones in first. One of my favourites, the rattlesnake plant. Now, it's not the easiest to grow. I wouldn't argue about that. But you get it right in these conditions, and it's beautiful. You've got the height. It lifts the whole landscape up. And I split a bigger plant up to get this one and kept it in water while I was doing it. Don't ever treat your plants as if they weren't alive. They're growing. Twist it round. Dig the hole. Pop the roots in. Feather it down a little bit. Manipulate it round. The long arching stems lift the whole landscape up like that. Beautiful. They'll curve over. It's just stood up because I was messing around with it. They'll curve over and fit. The quality of the foliage. This is the tree in the miniature garden landscape. This is the copper beech at the end of the garden in miniature. It gets even more exciting. Think of a garden in undulations. You're creating undulations with your foliage patterns. The ivy. Beautiful things, ivies. This is one of the hardy ones, but it's a miniature. It won't go romping all over the miniature garden and out of the top and into the sitting room. It'll take a long time to do that. And it's fairly root bound, so it'll be even happier to get out of there. Because what I'm going to do with this is put it in there. See how that lifts up the side of the container? I've got an ivy exactly like this, growing out in the garden, creating exactly the same impression, giving me height up a wall at the back of a border. And as you always use the walls in a garden, it's another dimension. So you use the walls of a terrarium. See how that's lifting up now, and the beautiful foliage pattern, the contrast between the dark red of the rattlesnake underleaf and the green and white of the ivy. This is what gardening's all about. Not plants as individuals, stick them in and it doesn't matter, but plants as a collection, as an association. I'm not sure whether I like the zebra plant better as a foliage plant or when it's in flower. But certainly in the terrarium garden, I'm going to take the flowers off because I want the foliage. It's a contrast. Aren't they pretty, though, really? You get the combination. I'm particularly emphasizing the variegated, the lighter colors at this end of the terrarium, making a point of grouping the variegations. They're so totally different in leaf color. That's pretty as a picture. And there's not a flowering plant in yet. Now, I know you can get St. Paulias in dark purple, in dark red, but in this setting, you want a light color. It's going to be in a room, and you want something that lifts it a little bit. But it's even smiling through the glass, that one, because they love these sort of conditions. They really do enjoy the warmth and moist atmosphere. And the great advantage of this sort of garden is that you can get your hands in and take the dead flowers off. There. Now, something a little bit brighter. Be a little gorblimey in the middle. Nurtura depressa, the bead plant. Like a little hummock covered with grandmother's orange beads. Don't be frightened of contrasting colours. If it screams too hard, you can always let it out again. And I must confess to picking a lot of my favourite plants for this. The little earth star, there's nothing self-important or assuming about it. It's beautifully foliaged. And then when it's going to flower, you get a little tuft in the centre there, as if it was almost apologising for having the temerity to flower. I like it. I think it's great. And this will keep the line flat. You know, there's the same satisfaction working in a terrarium garden like this, with your fingers in the soil, as you get from planting up a border outside. And I can now go up, very determinedly up, having kept the line down all along the front of the container. I want some drama here. We've kept it fairly flat. We want a dramatic increase in height. And the begonia boweri has beautiful foliage. There's such an infinite variety of foliage patterns in the stove plant. And because you're giving them conditions that are ideal, you're freeing them from the weather, from frost and all the other things that harm leaves, you're going to get that foliage developing to perfection. It may seem a contradiction to put a saxifraga, a mother of thousands, in the back of the container. What I want to do is to bring the long trailing runners round in to fill this space here, because I've got a little bit of landscape to do there yet. And eventually they'll go up the side. And there you have the planted up garden. Have a look at it. Look at it from all angles before you decide it's finished. That'll do. I want to watch it growing. I don't want it full straight away. Now my little bit of landscape. You can use stones for this. Nudge that up to the earth star, because they do grow beautifully on dry pieces of wood. Then the other piece, just pushed under the leaves of the African violet to lift them up off the ground. Now it needs watering, and don't go sloshing the water in, or you splash it all over the flowers, all over the foliage, and that spoils the whole look of the thing. It's like a tropical thunderstorm. And the way I do it is to get a cane or a flat piece of wood and direct the water down the cane to the particular plant that needs it. That way it's done softly and gently and right to the roots without marking the leaves. And then when the garden's settled down, give it 2 or 3 days, you can put a lid on, and that makes it totally enclosed. You're completely in control of the climate. It's just like having a garden to play in. You can get your fingers in the soil, you can do the watering, you can do the cultivation. You've got the beauty of foliage, the beauty of flowers, totally unsullied by the weather. Everything, as far as a gardener can possibly have it, is under your control. And I know exactly where that's going to go. It's going to go on a little table beside a stone fireplace. Flowering plants are the bedding plants of the indoor gardener. They're not really permanent. You can change the colour style of a room completely by changing the flowering plants. You can use the lighter colours to lift the shadows in a dark corner. Or you can paint ribbons and patterns along the front of the more permanent foliage plants. Strange how they give a vibrancy to a room. Immediately you introduce a new selection of plants into the room, and they don't take a lot of looking after. They need the regular watering, because no use having an unhealthy plant in a room. They've got to have the sheen of good health on the leaves. They've got to look right, otherwise they might just as well be out on the compost heap. So feed them and water them. And the rewards are absolutely marvellous. Paulia's African violets are one of the most popular houseplants, and I think deservedly so when you see the quality of the flower and the subtle colours that you get. But they're not easy to grow. You've got to give them exactly the right conditions of humidity and light and warmth. But there is a bonus to counteract that. They are very easy to propagate by leaf cuttings particularly. Don't take the outside leaves. Don't bother with those, because the more foliage you take from the middle, within reasonable limits, the more flower you're going to get. As you pull a leaf out, then you get flowers developing. And don't either, on the principle that those leaves are moribund anyway, take those for propagating material. You want good, healthy, disease-free foliage, like that one there. And when you take it away, pull it out right at the base. Don't leave a stump of the whole leaf there at all. You can see that's absolutely clean back to the stem there. There's no sign of the old leaf joint at all. With all house plants, if you're doing any pruning or taking cuttings, don't leave stubs. They rot back, they rot right back into the crown, and you could lose the whole plant. There's a beauty. Young, vigorous, just coming up to mature leaf, with the stalk coming not from the base of the plant, but from round about the middle. And the leaf stalk doesn't want to be any longer than about 3/4 of an inch. So break it off. Don't cut it. You don't need a sharp knife to cut it off with. Just break it like that, and that's ideal. Any longer, and you run the risk, really, of soft rot and the plant not rooting where you want it to. And the same way with the other one. Break it off to about 3/4 of an inch. And if I'm in any doubt about the compost, with any cutting that I'm taking, I use a mixture of equal parts peat and sand. It's funny, most cuttings seem to accept and root in that with comparative ease. And the quicker you get the leaf cuttings into the compost, the better. Make a hole with your finger, not too deep, remember, because there's only 3/4 of an inch of stalk, and you don't want to hang the cutting halfway up the hole. And you put them in, back to back. This is a commercial trick, mainly to get as many leaf cuttings into the smallest possible space. But the ideal conditions are there for rooting, because each leaf has the maximum amount of light, and there's room for airspace between the particular cuttings, because even though St. Paulias need warmth and humidity, they don't want dankness, they don't want deadness, otherwise you get fungus disease. But put these in a temperature ideally of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. It's the right sort of warmth, and you want humidity, and you can put them inside a polythene bag, provided it has holes in the side. And then at intervals during the rooting period, you take the bag off and dry it off, so you don't get the clammy moisture. You've got an airy moisture, for want of a better word, a buoyant moisture. And ideally, given a temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit, within 10 to 12 weeks, you should have good, strong rooted plants with little plantlets growing from them, ready for potting off. And there's the old leaves. The parent leaves are still there, still looking as fresh as the day when I put them in, which is an additional reason for not using diseased material. There you've got a real old cluster of plants. That's productivity, that. One leaf, and I can see 2 plants there. Anything more will be a bonus. But I'm not going to leave them like that. You couldn't leave them cloistered together like that. You've got to knock them out and pot them up. And don't tip the old compost. You can see how the mould has grown on the compost, because you've provided the close, humid conditions that are perfect for rooting, which the St. Paulias love. Don't tip that onto your fresh compost. Very gently. Tap on the base of the pot like that. Get rid of the old rubbishly material. And gently, you can see the leaves there, very gently prise them apart. Now, in proportion to its size, the African violet doesn't make a great thumping root system. So I don't want to overpot. If you put them into too much compost, the roots can't use it all. It turns sour, and the roots begin to rot off, and they die back. Instead of going back just above the acid area, they continue to die back right into the crown of the plant, and you lose the whole lot. So I underpot, I give them an extra stage, and even though I've got several individually well-formed plantlets there, I'm not going to take them off yet. I want them a bit bigger before I wean them. So put them into small pots. That way they can be right through the compost within a matter of, well, a couple of weeks. The roots are using that, and I'll only leave them in there for probably 5 or 6 weeks, and then I'll repot them and take the little plantlets off and pot those up again, and I might even be very greedy and re-root the parent leaves too. And when you've repotted like that, be very, very careful until you establish them in the new compost. Keep them particularly warm, particularly humid, treasure them a little bit, and then, very quickly, you've got a plant like that. Now, that is a healthy young plant, I admit, but it's still a juvenile. It doesn't want to be messing about flowering, much as I like them. I want to build up the crown of the plant. I want a great, powerful piece of vegetation that's going to give me a heavy crop of flowers over a long period without sapping all the energy of the plant. So take the flowers off. Remember, as with the leaves, pull them right out at the base. No dead stalks left to set up a soft rot. Nip them off. Even though it seems like sacrilege, if you feel that way, you can apologize to the plant. Right off, clean by the stem. What a pity. But console yourself with the thought that you're doing the plant nothing but good. There it is, reduced back to the job it should be doing, which is building up that crown. Now, keep encouraging that African violet with warmth, with humidity, with feeding. Not in too big a pot again. This is enough to keep it going. I'm going to make it work for a living. And then if your growing conditions are right, you've got perfection, almost perfection, because the quality of the leaf, the sheen of health on the foliage, the great crop of flowers there. And how do you achieve that in the home once you've moved it out where you want to see it in the place you're living in? Well, you give it good light conditions, but not direct sunlight. It wants to be diffuse light. Good light, but not powerful sunlight that makes the leaves go grey. You've got to water it, and I make certain that I'm not using cold water, not straight from the tap by any manner of means. I draw a watering can of water from the water butt, I stand it in the same room as the African violet overnight, and then I plunge it in it the next morning, because the one thing you don't want to do is get the crown of that plant wet. You want to water it from the bottom so the compost is evenly moist. And a lot of people, I've gone to many houses, you know, where they have the African violet standing in a bowl with water in the bottom. Now, you stand yourself in a bowl 24 hours of the day with your feet in water, and very quickly you'd get sick. And the same thing applies to an African violet. If you're going to put it in a bowl, then put a layer of pebbles in the bottom, keep those moist, and that keeps moist air around the leaves and keeps the plant in a moist environment without being soggy wet. Keep the temperature, if you possibly can, around 65, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And that way you build up a healthy, glossy, bright plant. It looks good, it's growing well, it's flowering beautifully. But don't think that when that crop of flowers fades, that's it. Look after it, give it water, give it the right temperature. And there, down in that nest of leaves, you can see another crop of flowers, even bigger than the first lot. And if your plant is a wee bit sulky about flowering again, how do you persuade it to produce a second crop of bloom? Well, you can try changing the environment. Give it a change of room. Put it in the bathroom, somewhere different. That might work. Check your cultivations. Make sure your temperature is right, your feeding is right, your watering is right. And then finally, as a last resort, I increase the potash in the feed. Give it a high potash feed. A lot of trouble, yes. But when you look at that plant, you appreciate why the St. Paul, the African violet, is one of the most popular of houseplants. Deservedly so. What a guest to welcome into your house. With calceolarias, if you've got a big room, then you use the big flowered hybrids like this. But in a small room, they tend to be just a wee bit overpowering, so I go for the smaller, near species. The popular name of slipper flower just about does describe them, mine, but they remind me very much of a laughing hippopotamus, or a hippopotamus with mumps. They've got that shape of flower. You can either raise them from seed, or you can, particularly with the big flowered hybrids, you can keep a stock plant, cut them back, and then take cuttings each year. With the smaller flowers, nearer the species, they will come true from seed, and rather than keep plants over the winter, I like to raise them from seed. And they're fairly easy to germinate, unlike some of the things we grow. And use a loam-based seed compost, just enough in that to start them off. Firm it down and level it off. Make everything neat, because I find when you are neat in your methods of seed sowing, when you take care with the compost and make certain the top is level and you make certain the seeds are evenly spaced, then you get less problems with damping off and disease and things like that. Now, Cancellarius seed is very fine, very dust-like, so don't sneeze or it'll go right over the greenhouse and you'll have lost it. And if you're in doubt about whether you can sow fine seed thinly over the top of the compost, then mix it with a little bit of sand, and that'll get the spacing even. But it's comparatively easy with a little bit of practice to get it right. And take your time, don't rush it. Gardening should be a leisurely business. There. And then cover it with the finest whisper of compost or sand. Fine seed, if you cover them too deeply, they haven't sufficient food stored in the seed capsule to get above the compost surface. And you lose them and you wonder why they haven't germinated. And then gently firm it down, just to marry the seed and the soil together. And there, you can see why the top of the compost has to be level, because now when I water, the water will sink in evenly and the whole of the compost will be evenly moist. I'll get no little hollows, no seed washing down into hollows, and they'll come up beautifully spaced. And what I do now is stand them where they're warm, cover them with a sheet of glass, a piece of newspaper, and within 10 days, depending on the temperature, they'll have germinated, and then you must take the glass and newspaper off, of course, to let the light come to them. And then, in 6 weeks or so, they'll have reached that stage and they're ready for pricking out. They're just beginning to get a wee bit crowded in the pot. Now here they were in seed compost, loam-based seed compost, so I'm going to prick them off now, move them from a pot to a box, into John and his #1 compost. It's got just a little bit more food in it to keep them going. What you want is balanced growth, and then you get a neat, compact plant. I'm never sure what's gone on underneath the compost until I lift them out and have a look. Oh, there's a fair old root system there. That's what you want. Top is really immaterial if it's got a powerhouse like that underneath. About five across a box like that. And space them out. Keep your rows straight, because it's so much nicer when you look down your greenhouse and you see everything nicely spaced out. Plus the fact that if you get your spacing even, each plant has its fair share of light, food, water, and in a lot of cases air, because if you've got a good circulation of air through them, your risk of disease, of damping off and everything else is so much less. And keep them evenly moist and fairly cool. Don't give them too high a temperature or you get a gaunt and leggy plant, and that's not good at all. And then I leave them there for possibly, what, another 6 weeks? Until the flower buds are showing. That shows they want moving on again. They need more food. Lift them out. Marvellous how efficient an ordinary dinner fork is for separating plants. Root system good, right down to the base of the pot. Put them into a slightly stronger compost, John and his #2. You're aiming at balanced growth all the time. Don't ever think by sticking a plant into a very, very strong compost that you're going to do it a favour. Because all you do is push it violently and you get an unbalance and it doesn't look right. Use a pair of scissors to just remove that flower bud. You can see there the reason why. A mass of young shoots coming from down below. Then after a further week or two, that's what you finish up with. Instead of one single flower stem, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all about to burst into bloom. There's only one way of describing a mass display of cineraras like this, and that's spectacular. I don't know of any pot plant that gives you quite the vibrant contrast of colour that these do, provided you look after them correctly. They're easy-going plants, but get it a little bit wrong, and they do resent it. They object to hot, dry conditions. They object to being overwatered. And once a flower loses its lustre like that and goes dead, and the foliage goes brown, there's nothing really you can do about it, except throw it on the compost heap. Provided you look after it, provided you get everything right, this is the result. Great canopy of flowers like that. Fine, healthy foliage. And that plant is being supported by a 4-inch pot. It's not over-potted. If you give it too much room, then the whole of the compost isn't being used. And parts of it get stagnant, and they get wet, and the roots die, and it wilts. And you can see there that that one is desperately searching for more nutriment. The roots are out of the bottom of the pot, and that's no real hardship. To make certain that you don't overwater, I leave about ½ an inch of space between the top of the pot and the compost. Let the compost get dry, and then fill that up to the pot rim with water, and then let it get dry again before you water again, and then fill it up again. And then, because you are restricting the roots considerably, liquid feed every 10 days. Give the roots something to work with, because they've got to support that great mass of flower. And provided you keep it in light, cool, airy conditions, provided you water and feed it correctly, that's the result, a great canopy of flowers. Hydrangeas in full bloom like this really are beautiful, but being shrubs, they have a habit of getting too big for the house. And when that happens, you can put the old plants out in the garden, but first take some cuttings. Now, you can go over your plants when they're at this stage and take any non-flowering shoots which show as cuttings. But I prefer to save a stock plant and to cut the shoots hard back when they finish flowering. Cut the stems back to 4 or 5 inches. You're going to force it into growth to produce a crop of young shoots which make ideal cuttings. And what I'm looking for are 3 pairs of leaves, if I can possibly get them, and a growing tip. That shoot there is just about right, but because the hormone concentration, unlike other plants, is fairly well diffused through the stem, you don't have to cut underneath a node. Cut between a node, and that gives you a piece of stem as anchor, because what I'm aiming for is to bury that leaf joint about ½ an inch in the compost. Take the lower leaves off with a sharp knife, and dip the shoot end in rooting powder. Everything that helps, I believe in using. Make a hole in the pot. Push it in just deep enough to bury that node ½ an inch. Now, all that rooting medium is sand, soft sand. They seem to like a soft sand to root into, not a really sharp one. That one I cut underneath the node, because really by using as many leaf joints as you can buried in the compost, you've got a better chance of rooting. And if the top leaves are rather big, cut them down by half. It stops transpiration because what you're doing is you're removing a shoot from the parent, you're cutting off all the moisture supply, and if you've got big leaves losing moisture, you've got more risk of the cutting dying without rooting. Push it well into the compost and firm it in. And there's room for one more. And that one there, which is going to, with a little bit of luck, give me 3 plants. There I've got the 1, 2 pairs of leaves and the growing point with another pair of leaves just opening. Take the lower leaves off. Lovely strong cutting, that. Dip it in the rooting powder, knock off the surplus. And you've got to keep them moist, you've got to keep them humid, otherwise they dry up and die off. And you can either put them in a propagating frame, or you can put the whole pot inside a polythene bag. But if you put it inside a polythene bag, make sure the leaves aren't touching the sides of the polythene, otherwise they'll damp off. And you treat the cuttings exactly as you treat the parent plant. You keep them moist, you keep them humid, because when a big hydrangea is in growth and about to flower, you can't water it too much. I water them every day. And they take it up. They love this moisture. They seem to grow with increased vigor. And 6 weeks later, it's obvious that the cuttings have started to root, the tip is breaking away and growing, and the leaves have come away. Usually when a cutting doesn't root, except for the odd occasion, the leaves stay put and just shrivel. That's rooted. Goodness. That's rooted. Absolutely. There's a good solid root system through the sand. It's hungry, the leaves are going orange because there's nothing in the sand. So get it potted off. And I use a John Innes compost, but with no lime in. If you put lime in, you get pink hydrangeas. If you use an acid compost, in the main you get blue ones unless you're growing a naturally pink variety. Make sure the young plant is well potted, of course, but the secret with hydrangeas is to keep them moist. They do need a tremendous amount of water when they're growing. Look after them properly and you should get magnificent blooms like these. Azaleas are one of those seasonal house plants that produce a mass of brightly coloured flowers just when the gloom of winter seems to press us its heaviest. But they are expensive, so look after them. Keep them in cool, humid conditions. If you put them in a high temperature, then the flowers are quickly over and the foliage begins to scorch. Keep them watered and fed, and then about the middle of May, put them out in the garden in a cool, shady place and mulch them in peat. And then you want to aim at keeping the first plant for as many years as possible, and each year take cuttings. And that way you finish up with a forest of azaleas. Absolutely beautiful. And when the last of the flowers on the azalea fade, keep it watered and keep it sprayed over and fed, because what you want to do is encourage the young side growths like this, because they make perfect cuttings. Just absolutely right, that one. The ideal cutting, as far as I'm concerned, with an azalea is about that length, 2.5 to 3 inches long, just firming at the base. You don't want it hard. It just wants to be firming while still soft at the top. And you trim the heel with a sharp knife, so to get rid, not to take the sliver of old wood away, but just to clean it up like that. Take one of the lower leaves off, and that's a good cutting. And I'm very particular about the compost that I use for rooting azaleas. It's a mixture of 2 parts of peat and 1 of sand, and the sand must absolutely be lime-free. Any hint of lime in a compost for azaleas, and they get very unhappy indeed. Fill a pot up and just firm it lightly, briefly, and then dip the end of each cutting in the rooting powder, and dibble them in round the edge of a clay pot. I use a clay pot. They seem to be happier rooting in a clay container. And make sure, always, with every cutting that you put in, that there's no airspace at the base. It is vitally important that you don't hang the cutting. And when you water azaleas, remember that they don't like lime, so use rainwater if you can possibly get it. firm them in, usual couple of taps to settle them down, keep them moist, keep them humid. Ideally, if you haven't got a propagator, then inside a polythene bag after you've watered them, and you create the micro-humid climate that they need to root in. And if you've given them the right conditions, they'll root in 4 or 5 weeks. If you can't, they'll be much slower, anything from 8 to 10 weeks. But if you get it right, eventually you'll finish up with something like this. Now, it's obvious that those two have rooted there. They're into growth. The first signs of rooting are when the growing point breaks and you get young leaves at the top. But I can't tell how well they're rooted until I knock them out. I'm not going to try and fork them out, I'm going to knock them out very gently. That one certainly is rooted. Not quite as well as I would have thought, mine, because I have treasured them. Ah, that one's better. It's a little more optimistic. And this reluctant hero hasn't rooted at all. Now, that is quite extraordinary because they were all taken at the same time. They were all taken from the same plant. They were all rooted in the same conditions. One's got a titchy root, one's got a bigger root, and one's got no root at all. But if you look there, the callus has formed. That means it's going to root. So I'm not throwing it away. I'm going to put it back into the compost with a sharp admonition to get on with the job. But those two are ready for potting off. And you do use a special compost. There's no way that you can get azaleas to grow in the ordinary potting compost. And this one is known as the ericaceous mix, unless you want to mix your own, which is based on peat and lime-free sand. But you can buy it ready mixed, and it's got a little fertilizer added too. Now, immediately after potting, keep them close and moist and humid. Azaleas love humid conditions. They root better, they grow a much stronger leaf, and you don't get any discoloration of the foliage. And particularly when you bring them into the house, when they're in flower, they much prefer to be in a cool room rather than a hot, sort of dry-aired room which withers them up. That's the whole secret with azaleas. Create the conditions that you get in a woodland. Then they'll be happy, and you should, in 18 months' time, have some of those lovely flowers that are such a delight to look at. Christmas cherry, Salernum capsicastrum, really in the colour of the berries and the dark green of the foliage, express the festive season. But when you walk through a greenhouse and see a great mass of plants, what do you look for? Because if you choose the best, you're going to have something that'll give you colour for 3 or 4 months of the year. I had a plant last Christmas, and eventually I planted it out in the garden in July, and it was still a mass of berries. So you're going to get that sort of return if you choose correctly in the beginning. And what I look for is a good, short-jointed plant, a stocky plant that's clothed with foliage right down to the edge of the pot. Neat, well-shaped, perfectly clothed. And I don't want too many berries, bright orange at the beginning. I believe in getting value for money, and if you get a plant where all the berries are bright orange, you're not going to have the pleasure of watching them change from dark green to orange through all the transition period. What I don't want, something like this. Just a straight stem, no bushiness or anything, only 4 or 5 berries there waiting to develop. No, there's nothing I could do to turn that bad plant into a good one. I couldn't prune it, I couldn't feed it, I couldn't do anything to it because it's spoilt initially. Nor do I want something that looks like this. More like a standard apple tree than a Christmas cherry. There, the foliage is gone from the base. That will never come back. The lower leaves are still turning yellow. It means they're going to drop. Instead of getting better, that plant is going to get worse, because the stem will get barer and barer. So choose a plant. Make certain that you've got it as good as you can get it to begin with, and then, because the foliage tends to grow on occasions and hide the berries, you nip out the shoots like that. What you're doing is showing the berries off against the dark green background. The more you finger prune it within reason, the bushier, the better foliage you're going to get there, and the berries sit on it like a dark green cushion, the bright orange against the dark green. And they don't want high temperatures, they need a cool, equable temperature, and they'll last much longer that way. They don't need so much attention to watering. And when the plant is finished, the berries are over, you prune it hard back, and that makes it produce a mass of good cutting wood like that. And the compost that I put them into is 2 parts of sand, 1 part of peat. Another one, trim it. Take off any foliage that's going to be below the level of the compost. Dip it in rooting powder. Another one round the edge like that. And that one, you don't want a whole forest of Christmas cherries, so don't take any more than you need. And pop the pot and cuttings inside a polythene bag, but always when you put any cuttings inside a polythene bag, make sure the foliage doesn't touch the polythene. When they're rooted, they'll start into growth, and you pot them off and you keep them growing on. And then the big problem with Christmas cherries is to get the berries to set. So I stand them out in a frame about the middle of May when all fear of frost's gone. That way they're open to the pollinating insects. When the weather is warm, I damp them over morning and evening because that helps the berries to set. And they grow on there, you get a superb set of berries. Bring them back into the house as soon as the weather turns cold in September. They're the same family as the tomato. So treat them as you treat your tomatoes, but don't eat the berries. They'll do you no good at all, so keep them out of reach of children. You may not be able to eat the berries, but they do make a bonny pot plant. Cacti and succulents are especially interesting. Many of them come from the desert regions of America, and the stems function instead of leaves. If they had leaves in the desert, of course, they'd dehydrate and die. And a lot of people start a collection with one plant because, well, you can neglect it. You don't have to be continually watering it. But that's not the best way to grow cacti. Once you see them in flower, once you realize what an infinite diversity of stems and shape there is, then you begin to want to pursue that interest, to grow all the different species. But there's one bonus once you start a collection and they begin to flower. You've got the opportunity there of raising the plants from seed, because they do set seed with a little encouragement. And if you look closely into the flower, that one there is not quite ready. It's just beginning to open, because when the flower is ripe, the stigma comes up above the stamens, it protrudes above it, grows out from amongst them. Look at that flower there. There it's happened. The stamen are down below, the stigma is pushing up through them ripe, and with a little encouragement, taking a pair of tweezers and pulling some stamens off another flower that are shedding pollen, and then very gently dust it over the sticky head of the stigma, because both the pollen grain and the stigma are sticky, receptive like that. You can make a noise like a bumblebee or a moth. I don't know whether that helps. But what you're doing is the work of the bee or the moth in transferring the pollen from one flower to another one. That pollen grain will germinate and grow down the style and fertilize the ovaries. And you come to the next stage, and to me that's just as pretty as the flowers, because the seed capsules themselves, the bright scarlet, they're not quite portly enough to be ripe. I can pull one off, but I'm pretty certain that that'll still be juicy. Almost positively certain, yes. The sap dries up when the capsule is ripening. Now this one, a different species, flowered about a month before the other one, and the seed pods, much fatter, much more portly. That's a fair indication. And if you look at the end of that one, the old stamens there are dead. So there's a fighting chance that'll have ripe seed in it. Still a little bit early, I think, because the juice is still running there. But there, the seeds there, look. The black seeds come out, but not quite ripe enough. There's a little one sitting on the palm of my hand. Not quite ripe enough to sow, because cacti are creatures of the sun. There's no question about that. The seed must be full ripe. It germinates that much quicker. Now, if you haven't got your own plants, that's no deterrent to seed sowing, because you can buy cactus seed in so many different species and varieties that you can actually build up a collection of cacti from bought-in seed. It's very fine, mine. The temptation to open the box the wrong way. That's it. What you get for your money. Very fine, very dust-like. So I saw it off of paper. And the sowing medium, well, I find vermiculite is just the right stage of inertia and yet contains sufficient nutriment to boost the seedlings into growth. Sowing into compost is a problem. You tend to get it too wet, etc., whereas vermiculite will take up water to a degree until it's saturated, but the surplus drains away. There's no question of stagnation. And it doesn't grow algae and moss and all the other rubbish that the standard compost seems to do. So use vermiculite. Horticultural vermiculite, don't nip along to the local building site and get some of theirs, because that tends on occasions to be very limey. And when you buy vermiculite, you buy it by bulk, not by weight, because it is very, very light. And then what I'm going to do with that is to take it and plunge it in a bowl of water, because I want the vermiculite evenly moist before I sow the seed. You can see the water coming up, just speckling the surface of the thing. It takes up water. It's very, very hygroscopic. Now that is evenly moist. The moisture's right through. Every grain is super saturated. And that's the way that vermiculite drains. All the surplus gone within seconds of lifting it out of the container, and yet leaving the main body that you're going to sow into. Absolutely saturated. Now the exciting part, the sowing, and using the blade of your knife. Just get the paper like that. And if you start at one side of the compost, and very gently, as the seed rolls down, tease it across the surface. No way that you can get it overcrowded there. Very gently. Tease it down over the surface of the compost. Time, gardening is a thing of patience. Can be reflective. Not a seed wasted, not a seed in the wrong place. Even some bits of dust that might possibly be seeds have gone on there as well, because waste not, want not. And then cover it with a sheet of glass. It keeps them warm and it holds the moisture in, and they will surely germinate, sometimes in 3 days, sometimes 3 weeks. In fact, these have taken 3 weeks to push up. And if you look closely there, the little specks of green, cradle stage cacti. And there you can see the affection that the roots have for the vermiculite. That thing is actually clinging on to that vermiculite as if it was its mother. And this means that when you move them from the compost, there's the minimum check to growth, because they take a little vermiculite mother along with them and re-establish so much quicker. Not quite ready yet for pricking out. Drop him back in. He can get on with the business of growing there, as nature intended. And then when they get to this stage, in about 3-4 months, there you can prick them out. They're big enough to handle, and I'm certain that they'll have this same affinity for the vermiculite. There, see how it's clinging round the roots. They don't make a very big root system, but enough to support the plant. And now they're ready for transferring to the seed tray. And at this stage, I use a mixture of 3 parts of 3mm grit and 1 part horticultural grit sand. Now, there's no nutriment at all in that medium, so you've got to feed them. And use a very, very dilute tomato liquid feed. That's enough to keep them going. Don't think you're going to boost bigger, faster growth by increasing the strength of the feed. They don't like it one little bit. They can take so much and no more. And strange how useful a kitchen fork is, because the cacti sits between the prongs and they come up with a good old load of vermiculite on them. Already, you know, at this seedling stage, they've got the individual character of mammillaria, complete with spines. So it's a good idea to handle them not with your fingers, but with a fork, because they can be very affectionate even at this stage. And some cacti thorns have barbs on them, and instead of working out of your fingers, they work in. That'll be a nasty experience. Space them out evenly over the tray. It's so much nicer when you finish the work, when they look neat and tidy, and it has the additional advantage of giving each one a share of the space. And even in a seed tray, you'll find that individual seedlings within one particular species, some will grow faster than others. Because you can get, 6, 7, up to a dozen varieties in a seed tray, if you're growing a collection, make sure that you label each variety, because some of them are very much alike until they flower. I maintain, looking at that, looking down a trayful of different mammillaria, they're attractive even at this stage. And to my mind, the best way to display any plant is to put it in a garden context, and that includes cacti, because when you put it into a group like that, in a garden setting, you get the full beauty of the contrasting shapes and the contrasting colours. Now, you don't need any special container as long as there's sufficient depth to get first a layer of aquarium gravel in the bottom to provide the drainage, and then 1 or 2 pieces of lumped charcoal just to make certain the mixture is sweet and doesn't get stagnant, because the one thing that cacti don't like is stagnant moisture. And then to stop the fine compost that you're putting on top, washing down and blocking the drainage, put in a layer of peat, just a thin layer of peat as a barrier. Choose the plants that you like, put them in such a position in the container that each one complements or contrasts the other. I like 1 or 2 taller ones in to lift the level up, and then 1 or 2 of the more spreading, cobwebby varieties to give you a ground pattern, but always some of the golden-haired mammillaria that give you that change of season so exactly, and flower when they're comparatively young. And then once the landscape is complete, dress the top of the compost with gravel. You want a proper background. It's all to do with garden design. You can make a very attractive little desert garden using cactus. And you've got the added advantage that, unlike a garden of houseplants, you can go away and leave it for a week without any fear that they'll shrivel up and die on you. But don't get the idea because the cacti, because they come from the desert, they don't need water. During the growing season, they need moisture. The compost needs keeping just moist. And if your compost is well made, any surplus moisture will drain away, and the plants will be perfectly happy in there for several years. And you don't get a lot of problems with cacti, but there's one that inevitably, if you grow a lot of plants, you're going to get, and that is mealybug. You can smell them like broken biscuits when you go into a room, like mouldy biscuit. And all you do with those is to get a brush, a soft brush, and a bottle of methylated spirit, and wherever the colony is, just dab it like that, and dab it on the mealybug, because the mealybug have a waxy covering, and what the methylated spirit does is penetrate that and kill them. The alcohol kills them. It doesn't harm the cacti, but the mealybug certainly will, so get after them as soon as you see them. There are some plants that you can grow for years and never get tired of them, and the Christmas cactus is one that I must have grown 20 years and I still like it. I think it's a most enjoyable plant. And the great beauty, this is the sort of thing that you'd buy if you went to a garden centre. One plant in a pot. And the great beauty of them is that they flower when they're very small. You don't have to wait years for a plant to mature. And they flower over a long, long period. Some flowers full open like that, you get a massive display. And then you get other flowers, the buds opening over a period that gives you the continuity of display. It's not into flowering out within a matter of weeks. And they're very easy to grow. They don't need high temperatures. They need sunlight, yes, but not too much, otherwise the foliage tends to get discolored. So I keep it on a sunny windowsill during the winter. That brings the flowers out. And then during the summer I stand it out in the frame and keep it watered and fed. And only two things, as far as I know, kill it, and that is being frozen. They don't like frost. They're a cactus and they don't want to be frozen. And overwatering is the other. They'll take a lot of water in summer, provided your compost is well drained and the surplus is running away. In winter, I keep the compost just on the dry side, then give it a good soak and allow it to dry out, so when you tickle the compost, it's dry on top. That is ready for watering now. But look at the quality of that plant. And not only are they easy to grow, they're easy to propagate as well. And one of the things about indoor gardening is immediately you get a plant that you enjoy, that you want to see more of. You want to make, instead of one, to have two. And they root very easily. All you do is pull the little stems off like that. But you need a plant that hasn't flowered. It's no use pulling those off, I find, because it's not really an active growth when it's flowering. Now this plant is in active growth because I've kept it in a cooler place, and that's the one to provide the cuttings. Don't spoil the shape of the plant, choose cuttings from where they won't be seen. Crossing and overcrowded stems will do fine. There's a good one there. These are flattened stems and they pull away very easily. If you just take it like that, bend it up. No sign of damage hardly, a little tiny mark. And that's your cutting. It's not too big. Get them too big, be greedy, and they tend to wither at the ends before they're rooted properly. Just about the right size. I might even get flowers from that the first year after rooting. It's one. There's another one in there. Down in, growing across. It'll be hidden even if it does flower. Just pull it away there. You can see how it joins into the stem. And the third one. And that one isn't going to subscribe to anything. All the rest of the branches are growing over the edge of the pot. So. That one has a better hold on life than the other two. But a little persuasion, and there it is. And that's the sort of wound, at the very worst, that you get. It's not really a wound, and it calluses over very quickly. And those are the cuttings, and they're just like any other cutting, providing you realize that these are flattened stems, they're not leaves. And the compost that I use is loam-based, the John Innes seed compost, but with extra sand added. It needs to be gritty, it needs to be free drainage. And the one thing you don't want with any cuttings is stagnant water. Keep it moist, the surplus water goes through, and then you get root formation very, very quickly. It's a lovely compost, that, very gritty. And put the cuttings round the edge of a clay pot. I do like clay pots for cactus. I can adjust the watering better. I think the clay being porous enables the plant roots as they form to breathe through the side of the pot. And I'm going to gain an immediate effect, so I'm going to put them round the edge of the pot, and the cutting has a natural curve. You can see how it arches over. And I'm going to encourage that by putting it in that way. So as it roots, it arches over the edge of the pot. I bury, or almost bury, one of the flattened pieces, like that. One into there. I never get tired of taking cuttings. It doesn't matter how many you take. There's still an excitement of thinking, well, my goodness, I've got one Christmas cactus. If all goes well, I'll soon have 4. 1 big one, 3 little ones. They're settled in. All I've got to do now is give them the conditions for rooting the quickest possible way. Water it well and then keep that warm. Keep it moist. And then when they've rooted, I've got 2 options really. I can either do what I did here and pot them up into a bigger pot, 1, 2, 3 cuttings, so that I get a big plant immediately. Something that looks enormous, something that, when you think that every one of those flattened stems is going to produce a flower, you can imagine what a spectacle a big, mature plant of Christmas cactus is when it's in bloom. That plant has been watered, looked after. It needs copious watering during the summer. I give it a holiday in the frame, I keep it fed, and then you get the sheen of good health on the leaves. That's what, I mean, that is a foliage plant. It doesn't really matter if it flowers or not. It's got quality foliage, it looks healthy. And there's nothing more satisfying to a gardener than a healthy-looking plant. Or I can pot them up individually and finish up over the course of years with a patriarch, something that looks like that. That plant must be, I should think, about 14 years old now. I can't remember exactly. It still gives me the same pleasure, the same delight when it's flowering like that as it did when it flowered the first time as a cutting. Beautiful. You put that down in a room and the eye is taken straight to it. It lights the room up by the quality and the colour of its flowers. And this is one of the things you've got to remember with indoor gardening. You want something attractive. The setting must be right. The context must be right. You get the light through a window, through those flowers, translucent at a time of the year when you can't garden outdoors. And this is the great beauty of indoor gardening. It doesn't stop when the winter comes. It doesn't stop when the weather's unkind outside, when there's snow a foot deep or the ground is frozen hard or it's throwing it down. You can turn in and get the same satisfaction from growing good plants indoors, from growing plants that flower like that indoors, as you get from the open garden in the summertime. Well, that's the end of the indoor garden videogram. I hope I've given you some idea of just how you can use plants in the home and how much pleasure and satisfaction you can get out of cultivating them. There are other videograms in the series on vegetables, on fruit, on flowers, and they're full of practical hints as well.